Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation 4 to take a look at another premium ship in World of Warships Legends. This time we'll be taking a look at the campaign ship for the March 2021 update, the Ochakov, a Tier 7 Soviet cruiser. For this review, I'll start with some history, then we'll move into analysis, discuss commanders, run down the stats with you, and of course, finish off with some gameplay. If you do want to skip around it all though, you can find some time codes down in the description. Trying to gather history for this ship is basically impossible to do in English, but what I can tell you is that this is a representation of a ship whose design process began around 1946, with the in-game information stating that the year of the design you see is 1950. The light cruiser project MLK was an attempt to come up with one or more cruiser designs around a uniform main battery consisting of either 130 or 152mm guns. In total, there were about half a dozen different designs, featuring between 3 and 6 turrets, with most turrets featuring 2 guns, though there was a design of this ship that would have had the fairly traditional 3x3 arrangement of 152mm guns that we see on some other Russian cruisers. The ship designs were intended to fill a role similar to the Brooklyn-class cruisers in the US Navy, with their primary roles being engaging light surface units, namely other cruisers, destroyers, and potentially even smaller ships as well, and air defense. This is why some of the designs include a main battery which is capable of being elevated to as high as 80 degrees. The version that we get in this game, at least at this point, is the Ochakov, which is not actually the name of any ship that was laid down as part of this project, just what Wargaming is calling this particular design. And it is probably the most traditionally armed version, with 4 gun turrets each toting 2 152mm guns, rather than upwards of 6 twin turrets, or the very optimistic 4 quad gun turret design that probably makes you wonder if vodka is the chief export of Russia. For the record, it's not. It is crude oil, but I don't know what it was in 1950. In any case, these cruiser designs would have been victim of their age, as missile research and development in the 1950s meant that they would either be obsolete upon completion or very shortly thereafter, so none of the MLK project cruisers were ever laid down, much less built. In terms of the Ochakov in-game, I really feel strange reviewing this ship because what I want to say is that this ship can be played like any other Russian cruiser, just not as good. But if you want to get the most out of it, then you're really going to have to take your faith in your life in your own hands and really hope that people refuse to shoot HE at you. So let's address the 3 things that Wargaming has said that this ship can do. Sure shot. Yes, she definitely has high velocity, low shell arcs when firing over range. This is actually something of a pro and a little bit of a con at the same time, because if you want to try to play behind an island, you don't have nearly as many islands to choose from as, say, an American ship would, which just lobs shells into low orbit. And usually when you can find an island, you're not quite as safely tucked in behind it. Reloader. Above average main battery reload. This is definitely true, but you do have to take into consideration that you have 4 fewer guns than every other Tier 7 Soviet cruiser out there. Sure, there may only be 2 of them right now, but this isn't a huge advantage because the difference in your rate of fire doesn't actually make up for the fact that you have relatively few small guns. And yes, modest guns, true. And kind of a disadvantage, but every one of these has a but. You do have other advantages over other 6-inch cruisers, which we'll get to in a moment in the commander section. The thing I'd say about this ship is that you have what appears to be really shockingly low survivability, both in terms of hit points and very laughable armor. And the thing is, this actually plays a little bit like an Emile Bertin, but Soviet and Tier 7. You have a bit more armor, even tier for tier, than that French ship, but the ship still rewards irresponsible play, and most of all, aggressively and intentionally irresponsible play, something which I dare say I may be something of a natural at, if I do say so myself. But if I'm to be serious, I said this ship has a laughable amount of armor. And that means angling against a battleship is actually frequently a mistake. Just about every citadel I've ever taken in this ship, and I have given away at least one devastating strike while playing this ship, and it was when I was dodging and weaving, and presenting an angle where I expected to be able to bounce a shot, but ended up just getting wrecked. In a lot of occasions, going broadside and having faith that you'll survive is a better option. There's enough armor here to initiate the fuses on 16-inch guns, and the smaller of the two sets of guns available on Grosse Kurfürst, but even if the shell arms, it may pass straight through your ship anyway and detonate on the other side. And that said, you do have enough armor here that you can bow tank cruisers, at least the ones that want to shoot AP at you, which means that you're able to push in on them, switch to AP yourself, where appropriate, and use your torpedoes. They are definitely better than your average set of Soviet torpedoes, which may not be saying a lot, kind of like saying, my country has better economy than Soviet Union. Yeah, no kidding. Not hard to do, but actually they're better than average in pretty much every way other than their reload time. Under the right circumstances, this is a very powerful ship, and I'd say I had some pretty good times actually testing it. But I would caution to say that I think I'm exploiting something of a limited resource. The more people who realize how to fight this ship, which is, in short, to shoot HE at it, this will become harder and harder to play, but in the very short term, or the very long term, just maybe not the medium term, this ship offers you a different playstyle than other Soviet cruisers, which are just, stay almost as far away from doing anything but damage as physically possible and shoot HE until all the battleship players uninstall the game. If you're looking to do that in yet another Soviet cruiser, it's certainly still possible to do that in the Ochakov, but both the Kutuzov and Chapayev do a much better job with that particular type of gameplay. In any case, some of this is kind of an overstatement. What you're going to need to do, though, is realize when you need to offer yourself up and pray, and when you can use what very, very little armor you have to try to defend yourself. Because going broadside to a light cruiser or even many destroyers is going to get you wrecked. The commander situation within Soviet cruisers remains pretty similar to other ships. But before we jump into that, we might want to say something briefly about equilibrium of power. The Ochakov seems to have 1/5 penetration on its 152mm guns. What this means is that this ship penetrates the upper belt, deck, and extremities of most cruisers she'll ever face without taking this skill, since almost all of them have 30mm or less, covering the vast amount of their ship. So it isn't quite as important to have. Against equal tier and higher tier battleships, though, you will benefit from EOP if you want to score penetrations against pretty much anything but superstructure. And you will need to balance out whether or not you want to do direct damage with your HE shells or simply rely on your fire chance to do the damage on those targets. So let's start with the Soviet cruiser commander, Kuznetsov. I say the Soviet cruiser commander because he's actually the only Soviet on the screen right now, but more importantly, he is the go-to for pretty much all of the Soviet cruisers. This is because he offers both range with his base trait and even more range with reaching out. This tends to help your survivability either by attaining a range where you aren't going to even be shot by return fire, or because the returning fire is simply not accurate enough to hit you. In a pinch, this will also probably confer improved AP penetration and damage, as well as improved accuracy, which you'll probably need considering the ranges where most people play Russian cruisers. If you want to play the Ochakov in that way, you will get the standard Soviet cruiser experience, in particular like the Chapayev, just with a lot less HP and lower damage potential, and for whatever reason, better torpedoes that you'll probably never be close enough to use. If you want to consider Makarov, then you'd end up with some notable advantages, particularly if people realize just how much HE damage this ship takes. Though you can build a nimble kiting cruiser with Makarov with excellent rudder shift and turret traverse that is frankly just unnecessarily good, you are going to end up closer to your opponents than the Surgeon General might recommend, and with few offensive capabilities added to whatever comes stock with this particular ship. And of course, our base commander, von Essen, offers some unique options, not the least of which is the greatest concealment options for very easy single, double, or even triple concealment, and that can be one way for you to get around the battlefield without dying. He also allows for some fairly mild improvements to fire chance, speed, and range, which is what I would do if I ran von Essen. To the extent that this changes your opinion, he is the only commander here who does not have access to equilibrium of power, so you'll probably want to stick with fully packed if you do choose him. And personally, I don't think that's much of a trade-off. I would run this ship without equilibrium of power, no matter which commander I was using. When moving into stats, we already have 2 Soviet cruisers at this tier, and it would be good if you were familiar with at least one of those before considering going for the Ochakov. In any case, it makes the most sense to compare this ship to both of those, because though different, there are some pretty noticeable similarities between these 3 Russian ships, and the Ochakov has a lot more in common with them in Legends than it does on PC. In terms of survivability, the Ochakov certainly appears to be a delicate flower. With just 34,730 HP, a really weirdly specific number, you have a pretty pathetic amount of hit points. With an armor of just 15 to 100 millimeters, you also have laughably little protection. And though it doesn't list it here because you don't have any, most cruisers at this tier have around 10% torpedo reduction. A funny thing happens though when you start getting hit by shells in the Ochakov though. There were more than a few times in testing this out when I got caught full broadside to a battleship and I thought, well, that's it. Only to walk away with only taking a few thousand damage. This has to do with the Ochakov's thin armor. You do have enough armor to bow tank other cruisers, and though your armor can arm the fuse of 15 and 16-inch shells, with a pretty huge citadel, the shells seem to very easily pass through you if you're presenting essentially the worst possible angle you can at close and medium range. This makes the Ochakov really a strange ship to play because you can negate all AP from cruisers and destroyers while bow tanking, but presenting reasonable angles to battleships is almost the last thing that you want to do unless it's somebody who's really likely to be shooting HE at you. You know, eventually like the Conqueror. So yeah, basically try to stay away from HE ships and torpedoes, and try not to take AP from smaller ships directly into your citadel. The biggest difference that you're likely to find in terms of artillery between this and other Soviet ships is you have 4x2 152mm guns. The Kutuzov and Chapayev have 4x3, or in short, they have 4 extra guns. You do average that out a little bit with 5.8 second reloads, but you also have lower main battery range at just 15.5, which loses out to 300 to 500 meters to the Chapayev and Kutuzov respectively. This 13.8 second turret traverse is really fast, fantastic really, and to me this is another indication that this ship is intended to be played comfortably closer than its other Russian peers, because this is in fact the best turret traverse at the tier 4 cruiser. Damage is pretty much the same as your fellow Soviet ships, though the Chapayev does enjoy an extra 100 damage on both HE and AP shells. Unfortunately, this places your damage per minute lower than either of those ships, but since you have 1/5 pen rather than 1/6 pen, you can actually consistently damage more targets while you're shooting HE and also preserve your fire chance. So as we smoothly segue into Pyromania, your fire percentage is the same per shell, but due to the number of guns and the volume of fire you can put out there, this is before EOP is considered, you do have the worst fire starting chance among these 3 Soviet ships, but you're still above average overall. And for what it's worth, you have no secondaries, but still not really a big deal on a cruiser, much less a Soviet cruiser. In terms of torpedoes, the top level analysis is that the Ochakov has the best torpedoes of any Tier 7 Soviet cruiser. You have a single quintuple launcher on each side of the ship, same as the Kutuzov, and that means 2 more per side than the Chapayev. None of these ships live or die on the strengths of their torpedoes, generally, but essentially the difference is this. Worst case scenario, your torpedo reload is very bad, but it's actually only 2 seconds longer than Kutuzov. Your damage is pretty much middle of the pack between Chapayev and Kutuzov, and decent among all cruisers at the tier. But you do fire 2 more torpedoes than Chapayev. You also come away with both the high speed, 65 knots, of the Chapayev torpedoes with decent range of the Kutuzov torpedoes at 8 kilometers. Overall, this means, though you have to wait a little bit longer on a reload, something you generally don't need to do in reality, you have easily the highest damage torpedo salvos with joint best range and joint best speed of any of the cruisers that we're talking about. Overall, this is a pretty good torpedo complement among Tier 7 cruisers, and it makes this ship very dangerous at close range. In terms of mobility, most Russian ships are decently fast, but they pretty much come in at average at Tier 7, with the Chapayev at 33.5 and Kutuzov being an even 33. The Ochakov does noticeably better at 35 knots. For turning circle, the Chapayev has a really tragically wide turning circle. Kutuzov does quite a bit better at 760, and here you can see Ochakov has the best among the Russian cruisers, and this 750 meters is, once again, pretty much average. This 7.4 second rudder shift is pretty much in between the 2 other Russian cruisers, and overall, more than a second better than average, making this potentially a fairly nimble ship. As we move into concealment, the Ochakov's concealment is not really very good in World of Warships Legends. This is quite a bit different than what she is on PC, where she is very stealthy, but she does beat out the nearest Russian cruiser by half a kilometer, and the Kutuzov by a bit more than that. This carries over also by being the least detectable from the air, and also least detectable while firing in smoke. All of this is an improvement and aids the Ochakov in fighting a bit closer to the enemy than you traditionally do in other Soviet cruisers. As we go into consumables, for all intents and purposes, you have pretty much the consumables you'd expect on the Chapayev. You have sonar, which is pretty much your standard sonar, same as American ships get for that matter. You also have radar, which is always a neat trick. This is the same long range but relatively short duration Russian surveillance radar that you'd find on Chapayev. Unlike on the PC, you do get a heal. Because your HP is a lot lower than Chapayev, it doesn't recover nearly as much health, and the only other difference here is that it has a 60-second reload instead of 55, which is not super impactful to how you'll play this ship. And finally, with all of that out of the way, we're going to jump into some gameplay. As you can see, we're going to be on Estuary. This is, of course, the original map where you get a lot of really wild results because it's never quite played the same way twice. In any case, we will go ahead and put our commander up on the screen. As you can see, it is von Essen. Why von Essen? I test all of the commanders, and this is just the commander I happened to have the most interesting results in part because when I was playing with Makarov, I was doing some standard kiting things, and that doesn't always work super well. Part of that's just because I was in the mentality of playing it as a kiting ship. I actually think he probably does have advantages to playing like you'll see in this match, as long as you don't get into that mindset. And what I did find is that when I was trying to do the wiggly bits, occasionally I would end up taking just a catastrophically terrible amount of damage. And so in this setup, I don't think von Essen is doing too terribly much for me, other than I have obviously pretty decent concealment for a Russian ship. 10.6 is nothing really special, but it's not terrible. So as the game starts up, we're obviously moving behind some of these very accommodating islands. This works as long as nobody is really clever and drives to about this location. As you can see, there are a couple people who have done that, and now I am spotted. So I'm really trying to burn this Bismarck. It is not working super well, but as you can see, this is pretty much a ship that if you can arrange it, you can play it just like any other annoying ship that's going to set everything on fire. Even those of you who like to play the annoying ships who like to set everything on fire probably have to at least give me that one. It is annoying, and you do set everything on fire. So you're above average in terms of a fire starter minute per minute. You're going to do a decent amount of damage, mostly because, particularly against cruisers, that 1/5 pen is super nice. Against ships like Bismarck, I pretty much have to hit her in the superstructure in order to do damage, or hope that I start a fire on some other part of that ship. Now we're trying to obviously deal with the shape of this island. As you can see, this island is a little bit more substantial, has some nice hiking paths up there, but it is a little bit too tall for me to just shoot over. So I have to kind of fiddle with my position there in order to get the excellent shell arcs to actually throw those shells over and all the way out there at Bismarck. Now, as she backs up behind the island, we're going to switch our target over to Miyoko. Miyoko is also hiding behind an island. Also a ship that would have a little bit easier time doing what I'm doing right now. We shoot an island. We've done a lot of shooting islands in this, and we're going to continue to do a lot of shooting islands. There you can see I am checking on some of my stats in terms of just, I forget sometimes how to play this. How long is my range? What's my torpedoes, etc. In any case, our team is starting to fall apart just a little bit. And I'm pushing up because that's a thing that I'm prone to do. This is actually fairly early in my testing, or maybe kind of midway before I fully realized the potential of this particular boat. And now what we've got is, just using our pretty decent speed here. You can see with just a little bit of extra help from Warships and from that basic battlefield propensity flag, we are moving pretty well, above 36 knots. You lose quite a bit of that in a turn pretty quickly, but that's nothing new for cruiser players. Now we really do want to help our Bismarck, because what he's doing is exceptionally brave, but maybe not what would lead to a long and prosperous life. But he is going up against Miyoko and Bismarck, and so that ended quickly. Now our team is losing very badly. We've still got 3 ships over here. You can see Bismarck right there. Very, very scary ship. He's actually shooting AP or HE at me. So this isn't really all that concerning to me immediately. If he continues to shoot HE, he's going to do a pretty good amount of damage, but he's not going to be able to take advantage of the fact that I am presenting essentially just about the worst type of angle I possibly can to him. We put the widespread out there because this is going to basically assure that we hit him one way or the other. And we managed to hit him 3 ways when really only 1 was necessary. Miyoko is nice and close. We are going to put some torpedoes on the other side, and you see we've switched over to AP. Just a beautiful shot there. And 6 quick citadels later, He is no more, and we've wasted all of our torpedoes. Megami, it's going to be pretty much the same story. We just are going to try to push in on him, use the AP when we can. Really, we're just trying to make a good last stand for our team so that the results page doesn't look quite as depressing. I would have also noticed, though, we were down by 4 ships. Now we're actually only down by 1, though. This still doesn't look great, but it could look a lot worse. I mean, this looks like a game that you can actually come back from. Switching over to HE, he is a little bit too well angled, as you can see on the minimap. You can also see the effect that 1/5 pen is having on the enemy ship. We're getting almost all penetrations, just 1 shatter there. But he's turning so that he can make a maneuver, which means straight back to AP. And once again, we're just chunking him for Citadel, 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 dead. And all of a sudden, it actually doesn't look all that terrible. You can see that the enemy team has all 3 of its ships over on the east side of the map, and I am sailing unopposed into their cap. That'll probably get a little bit of attention, which is exactly what my teammates probably would like me to do. And we've done a pretty decent 105,000 damage along the way. Overall, though I don't think I'd learned this lesson quite by this point, if that Bismarck was shooting AP at me at that range, I would have offered the entirety of my broadside, because his guns are going to go probably straight through my ship. If I offer him my bow, he overmatches my front bow armor. That'll take him straight to the flat front plate, which he's going to have no problem penetrating. And considering the length of the Citadel, it is going to explode inside my boat, and that'd probably be pretty quick death. Now, as we are moving forward into the base, though, we're trying to get a situation where we can actually shoot through this gap. You can see, once again, doing a lot of damage to nature, just barely sneaking anything over. We do manage to get a fire, so we are helping. And we're also kind of reminding the Massachusetts that we're over here. It looks like he's definitely noticed, because he's turning in, and I am still spotted. Doing a little mental math, we're thinking, well, that destroyer is probably a lot closer than I want it to be. We pop our excellent long-range radar. In this case, we're actually exhibiting some decent gunnery, which, particularly at range, for me is not always a guarantee. And even though we only have 20 seconds on that, this is one of the cases where that exceptionally good turret traverse and also fast reload speed does benefit the Ochakov, because you will be able to do a little bit more, I feel, with your radar, because you're going to be closer, most likely, and because of those other factors than maybe the Chapayev trying to shoot destroyers that tend to be a little bit further away and having less responsive turrets. Now that I am tucked away behind this island, I am basically just blocking the enemy cap. This will help if I get destroyed, because we will probably still win on points then, because it doesn't look like they have blocked our cap at all. Now, as the Massachusetts gets pretty close to us, we activate our hydroacoustic search, or sonar, I guess it's called now. Just to kind of track where he's at. If I were the Massachusetts, I probably would have suggested going a little bit more wide to give me a little bit more chance to dodge torpedoes if they show up. In this case, and though I don't really know it, if he had hit me there, there's a good chance those would go all the way through. Unfortunately for those homeowners down on the beach, he does land all of his shots in those houses. That pretty much spells the end of the game. I'm going to give him the good game before we go out. And we finish off with our 5th kill. And the weird thing is, this isn't actually even close to the best game that I had in this ship. And honestly, the more irresponsibly I played it, the more it really worked. And that kind of segues us into my closing thoughts on this ship. I think this ship will get less powerful over time, just because once everybody starts getting it through the campaign, they're going to realize how to play it, or at least realize how to play against it. So for a while, there's going to be some folks shooting a lot of HE at you, and that'll hurt this ship. The longer that goes on, the fewer people who watch YouTube videos. That may not make it a bad ship to play in standard games. Probably not going to be a real good ship to pick in any sort of competitive scene, because I feel like most of the people are going to know how to counter this. But in terms of sailing around and doing a little bit more than shooting from extreme distance, this ship is probably right now my favorite Russian cruiser. It's not a wildly ringing endorsement, but I'm also not going to say this is a bad ship. Just some things to think about when you're considering whether or not you want to purchase the Admiralty backing for this campaign. In any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed this little review, and as always, I hope to see you on the next one.